Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Rashmita, and I am the event planner for Microsoft Reactor. This session will run over the next 60 minutes, including Q&A. But before we begin today's session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We are all here to learn together, so please be respectful of other people's views, understanding of differences, being kind and considerate in the way you engage. The chat section will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. So please feel free to drop all your questions in the chat section. Let me bring in Will and Asger, our speaker for today's session. There you go.
Thank you,
Over
thank
to
you,
you.
thank you, Rashmita. Hello, everyone. We're live. How are you doing? How are you doing? Welcome to this session, the next session in our Microsoft Reactor series, all to get you certified the DP-700, the Fabric Data Engineer. And in today's session, we're going to be focusing on administration and governance, arguably one of the most important for the exam and generally when you're working in Fabric. My name's Will. I work teaching Microsoft Fabric on my YouTube channel in online communities, and I've got a business doing that as well. And I'm joined here today by Aushkir. Aushkir, how are you doing?
Very good, thank you. Welcome everyone. My name is Ausgerd. I'm a data platform MVP and I'm a consultant in Denmark where I work on Fabric and other data solutions. Let's go. Yeah. So for everyone, we are live and interactive. So say hi, ask the questions in the chat. Please be lively. Ask all the questions that you have. We are so lucky. Can you give me the next slide, please? That we have a great set of moderators, and those people are going to be answering all your questions in the chat. So me and Will, we are going to present the session, and the three people, Johan, Nama, and Vesa, they are going to answer all your questions. There are three incredibly knowledgeable people on the area, so don't be shy to ask all your questions. Next, please. As you might be aware, this is a part of a series. We are on the second to last in the series, in the administration and governance. The last one is next week, which is more of a preparation, so last things to prepare for the exam and the Q&A. So make sure you go to that, and if you have missed any of the ones that are already there, they will all be available on YouTube in short time. Please. There is a sweepstakes for exams voucher. So if you are attending this, you are probably thinking about taking the exam itself. So if you want to do it for free, you can go and enter. There's a QR code there, and there's also a link. Go to it, register, and don't wait until May 28th, even though that's the deadline, because there are some people being drawn out every week for one of those 50,000 free certification exam vouchers. Next, please. And not all that. When you're done with us today, don't before you're done, but when you're done with us, head over to Reddit. There is an AMA, so ask me anything, where you can go and ask all your Fabric questions. We have four great people there: Alexis, Shabnan, Matthias, and Anu, who are going to be answering all the different Fabric questions on the whole thing, not just what we are doing today, but this is a more general on Fabric. So head over to there when you're done, type in your questions, and then follow the live answering of those questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aushkir. Very great introduction. Let's start to set the scene for today's session, because like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about administration and governance. Specifically, we're going to be talking about, well, we're going to start with a very brief introduction to the DP-700, if this is your first live session. Then we're going to be digging into administration at different levels in Fabric. So at the tenant level, domain administration, capacity administration. Then we're going to go through to workspaces, how we can give access to people through workspaces, items, and at a more granular level as well, before doing a bit of Fabric governance, and then some practical tips for DP-700 success. So very briefly, if you're new to the DP-700, then I recommend you take a look at the study guide. That should be the central resource that you frame all of the rest of your revision around. You can find it in the link down there. Today, we're going to be focusing on configuring security and governance. There's been some other sessions in this series that have covered a lot of the other sections of the exam. So if you've missed those, like we mentioned, make sure you go and watch the recordings from the previous sessions. But let's dive straight into Fabric administration tasks and tools with Austria.
Yes, thank you very much. So if you go to the next slide, please. Before we go and dive into the administration, I just want to set the scene a little bit and talk a little bit about how the building blocks of Fabric are, so you can better understand why we do things in the order we do them. So we're going to start at the very broad level, or the tenant level. Typically, you have one tenant in an organization. You might have more, but typically you have one, and that's where all your content is going to be, stored. Within a tenant, you have one or more capacities, and they're going to be your compute. We're going to cover that a little bit later on, what that means. But that's where you have, all the Fabric items are going to belong to a capacity, and they're going to, use that compute. One capacity can only belong to one tenant. You might have domains. They are optional, but you might have domains, and they are going to be help you to logically organize your content. So you might, if you look at the image on the right, you have two capacities, and then you have domains around, verticals, marketing, sales, and finance. And then you have workspaces. A workspace is where all your content belongs. One workspace can only belong to one domain and one capacity. And then within the workspaces, you have all your items. That's where you will do your work. So an item belongs to a workspace, might belong to a domain, which belongs to a capacity, which belongs to a tenant. So it's a hierarchy of sorts, but you can organize yourself in a wide variety of ways in this. Okay, next, please. So with that out of the way, we have one slide. We have a few of those slides here on the long way, which is more like the a textual representation of what the responsibilities are. I'm not going to read through all this. This is for your benefit. But the Microsoft Tenant admin main responsibility is to make sure that the tenant is set up in a secure and governed way, so that everybody can do their job, but they can do it in the proper way. So that's going to be the framing role. Next, please. There are loads of tools that the Fabric admin has at the disposal. So you see there's a long list of things on this. We're not going to cover all this, but I think it's a good reference to understand what is available and what you have at your disposal. But we're going to pick the things that we think are most important, and we're going to go through them in the next section here. So next, please. So for the Fabric administrator, the main tool that you're going to be working with is the admin portal. This is a central place for all your administration of your tenant. We have some settings that decide what you can and cannot do. We have some capacity administration. We have workloads. We have workspaces, and all kind of different ways you can set set your tenant in the right way, so it's secure and governed and in line with the policies of your organization. If you do a lot of administration, then you do yourself a lot of favors by automating some of the tasks using the APIs and PowerShell. There are also things you can automate. There are some things you cannot, so be aware of that. But there's a link in the bottom that will take you directly to the admin portal. Now let's go to the next one, please. And the main section, I think the most important section for a Fabric administrator within the admin portal, is the tenant settings. This is what controls what features are available in your tenant across your organization. So can you export or not? All these different tenant settings, you can go through them in the list here. There are a lot of them. I think the last time I looked, there were 140 something. And they come new ones all the time. But make sure you look at the list, you make an informed decision of all of them. So they will support you in your request to make Fabric a governed solution. There are some granular, but some not very granular, and this is the key responsibility of the administrator to secure compliance and usability. So next, please. So what I want to do here is saying there are some challenges and solutions about working with the tenant settings. First of all, finding settings might be hard. Use the search at the top. It's invaluable. It makes it really, really easy to find things, but because the grouping is not always intuitive. The new settings come all the time. When Microsoft brings new feature to Fabric, they often bring new settings, not always, but often. So keep an eye on them and make informed decisions. Don't trust the default. The default might be right for you, but it might not be right for you. So make sure you go in through each and every settings and make sure that the setting is set correctly to what you and your organization need. Next, please. There are typically three different states you can set a setting to. You can set it to be enabled for the whole organization. You can set it to be enabled for a subset of the organization, or it can be disabled for the entire organization. Typically, you would want to have it only enabled for a subset. There might be some setting you have enabled for all organization, but typically you will say that I want to allow certain people to use a certain feature, and that might be a broad group, but it might be a very narrow group. It depends a little bit on what the setting is, but make sure that you understand what the implications of each settings are. Of course, if you want to do it like that, you need to have some kind of a cooperation with the eventID people to be able to create all the security group needed. But rather do that and do this correctly than just to open it up for everyone and then having to manage that later on. That's one of the main governance, challenge of Fabric is to rein things in when things go wrong. Next, please. Now, some of the settings that you can set in the tenant setting, you can delegate, and you can delegate it to 3 levels, and not all of them you can delegate, and there's not all of them you can delegate to all the levels. But you might be able to delegate it to a capacity level. You might be able to delegate it to a domain level, and you might be able to delegate it to a workspace level. And the reason why you want to delegate something is to to share the burden, to make sure that people that are closer to the actual content creation, they make a decision on if a certain feature should be available or not. There are a couple of settings within the settings that are delegated by default, and you cannot turn off delegation. So just go in and make sure you understand what the implications of those are. But delegation can be very, very useful tool. Please. Now the main, besides the admin portal, one of the main tools for the Fabric admin is the admin monitoring workspace. This is where you have a different reports and semantic model that Microsoft has created with information that allow you to keep an eye on what's going on in your tenant. So we have something about feature usage and adoption. So who is doing what when, and what kind of content exists on your tenant. What content is being shared, and whether it be overly shared or not. And then the Purview Hub, which we're going to come back to a little bit later on. So these are the 3 reports that Microsoft make available for you at the moment. Some of them might, they might come more at some point. They have announced that. And they also include semantic models that you can also you can customize your own reports on top of those if you want. You cannot do anything about the models, but you can do something about the reports if you want to. Now, the admin monitoring workspace is only available to admins by default, but you can share the reports with other people. They just won't see the workspace, but they can find the reports using browsing or searching for them. It's available to all Fabric customers, no matter what the license type or total number of users. So make sure you use it if you're a Fabric admin. Next, please. So it's intended for global admins or Fabric administrator, of course, but also you can share it with other people like capacity admins and domain admins, or maybe COEs or something like that. So make sure that they can see it if they need it. Just be aware you cannot do rollover security. They either see everything or they see nothing. So make sure that you understand what the limitation, what the implications are there. Next, please. So when we are done with now we're done with the tenant level, so the top level. Now we're going to go a little bit more narrow on the capacity level. So what is a capacity? So capacity is compute for Fabric workloads. Basically, it's what compute power you have, and it goes across all the workloads that exist in the workspaces assigned to that particular capacity. So no matter if it's a real-time analytics or a warehouse or a lakehouse or a data flow Gen 2, all of them use the same capacity and the same CUs. As I said, the capacity unit seconds, or the CUs, there are the base compute unit, and it frees you for thinking about memory and disks and all kind of things. You just buy a set of compute, and then you can go and get started. That is the magic of SaaS solutions. And of course, the more CU supervision, the more you can handle. That goes without saying. And each time you want to have more, you're going to need to double it. So we go from F2 to F4 to F8 to F16, and so on and so forth. So scaling up, always doubling up. Please go next. So you can use them in a wide variety of ways. So one thing is that if you start on the left, one thing you can do is that, I have a capacity, I'm running out of compute. I'm going to just buy another capacity. I'm just going to make it bigger. So I'm just going to go from F8 to F16 or whatever. Another thing you can do, if in the middle, is that you can have multiple capacities. You can say, I have one capacity for development and production, and the one development and test, and one for production, or one for development, one for test, and one for production, depending on your needs. So you can go and horizontally scale it. Or if you go all the way to the right, you can do something like regional availability, saying I want to have one capacity in this region and one in another region and one in the third region. This is to do with data residency, and we're going to come back to that in the last section today. But all of them are work. There's no really right or wrong in this here. Next, please. So one of the main concepts that you need to learn when it comes to capacities is bursting and smoothing. So basically, when our job runs in Fabric, it needs a certain amount of CUs to be able to finish. Let's say we have a job that takes 8 CUs to finish, and it takes 1 hour, but we only have an F2, so we only have 2 available. What Microsoft will do, it will say we're going to run it as fast as possible. So maybe we will use the whole 8 CUs for 1 hour, but we only have 2, so we owe 6. And those 6, we need to pay that back. And that's what smoothing is about. So bursting is about going and getting, using things you don't have and borrowing from here. And smoothing is then to say that, okay, we're going to pay that back, but we're not going to pay it straight away. We're going to pay it up over time. So background operations, you pay over 24 hours. And interactive, you will pay over 1 hour. So we're going to talk a little bit about, we have a slide on what is a background and what is interactive a little bit later on, just so you understand that. Next, please. But if you are constantly borrowing and you don't have, don't have enough time to pay it back, you will be throttled. So, if you're constantly overusing, you will be throttled. That means that things won't work. They won't work at least in the same way. So when you're throttled, first thing that will happen is interactive requests are delayed. So reporting, typically, reports are delayed. Second, what's going to happen is that interactive requests are going to be rejected. Reports are not going to work. And third is the background requests are going to be rejected. So any new pipelines or a Spark notebook or something is not going to work anymore. And the table on the right-hand side is going to show you a little bit, in what intervals these things they happen. And that's actually a pretty good idea to take a look at that table. And it can be important for your exam because these kind of things are typically something that get asked on exam. Next, please. So as I said, I have a link here. Just go and take a look because things might change. There are new things in in Fabric all the time. So interactive background, important to understand the difference there. Just follow that link when you have available time. Next, please. So the key responsibility of the capacity admin, again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's just to make sure that you have enough capacity and make sure that you use the capacity in the right way. So that's the main responsibility in my mind. Next, please. So what does the capacity admin do when they need to figure out if they have enough capacity and everything is running smoothly? They will use the capacity metrics app. That's the capacity admin's tool of choice. It's a built-in reporter or a Power BI app that you can install. You must be a capacity admin when you install it. And it requires a Power BI Pro license because it's a Power BI app. It will show you all the capacities that you are an admin of. And it will, even though you give other people access, they will also see all the capacities that you have access to when you set this up. It's installed in its own workspace, so you can decide what the workspace is called, and you can give everyone access to that workspace. As there's no restriction on that because it's just a normal workspace, a normal Power BI app. It's a composite model, meaning that some things are in directory and some things do need refresh. Specifically, if new items are created, they need to be refreshed to be able to, you can see them in the report itself, but the actual performance of the capacity is in directory. Next, please. And it will show you the two things that you need to pay for, which is the CU consumption and the OneLake usage. So the storage, you need to pay for those two. That's why it will show you that. And it will give you the overview of one capacity at a time, and it will show you the state of it. And you can go and drill into a time point to see some very granular data. Just be aware that because of smoothing, things might show up in a time period where you didn't execute them because it's also still being smoothed over a longer period of time. Just be aware of that. So things might look a little different than you think they are. And there are typically 5 different types of status for operations: success, failure, in progress, rejected, and rejected surge protection. Yes, and we just have a screenshot. So well, just give it on. A screenshot of how it looks. I'm not going to dive deeper into it, but this is really important to understand how this capacity metric app works if you want to be a capacity admin. Next, please. And the last, before we switch over to very granular things with Will, is the domains. Domains are as I said, a logical way to group your workspaces. So it's a very, very convenient way to say that, I have all my marketing workspaces or all my development workspaces or everything that, in some whatever way you feel like it's good to, group them, have them, in a different way. It's not very complicated. It's a tag basically, but there are some things that come with it, such as overriding settings. Admins can create domains. Admin can then add other domain admins or domain contributors. And the only thing you need to be aware, I think, from a governance perspective, in my mind at least, is that by default, everyone in the organization is the contributor to a domain when you create it. So go in and change that. Otherwise, it's pretty simple setup in these domains. Next, please. And the responsibility of domains, I think, are very different depending on organization. Depends on how you organize yourself with domains. There's no really one way or not one right way to do it. So have a look, and this will give you an idea about it. Yeah, next, please.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Ásgeir, for that really great look at tenant level, the capacity level, domain level, administration. I just wanted to take us back to this slide here, because this is where I'm going to take over and take us through workspace administration and items. But just before I do, you might be thinking, why do we have to learn about tenant level administration? I thought this was a data engineering exam, which is right, but you need to have an appreciation for what maybe other people in your business are doing, what's possible, all of that kind of stuff. But the stuff that I'm going to be talking about as a data engineer, it's highly likely you're going to be a workspace admin at least for your data engineering workspaces. So that's what we're going to be going through in this next section. So we're kind of like, let's just take you through into the workspace level now. And as a workspace administrator, one of your core responsibilities is about access, right? Because the workspace is one of the key security boundaries within Microsoft Fabric. We'll go through that in more detail in a second. You're also going to be ensuring that your workspace complies with various policies around data governance. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later on as well. And you're also going to be monitoring what's going on in your workspace, which brings me nicely towards workspace settings. So for the exam, for the DP-700 exam, you're going to need to know some of these key workspace settings. Specifically, I would focus around all of the licensing, focus on the Git integration, focusing on the OneLake tab in these workspace settings as well, and some of the Spark settings that were covered in an earlier session in this series. I also want to highlight workspace monitoring, because this is a relatively new feature that Microsoft have just announced. It's still in public preview. And within workspace settings, you can click this toggle to log workspace activity. What that's going to do is it's going to create an event house, and it's going to start streaming data, log data into that event house based on actions for specific item types. Okay, so workspace monitoring can monitor things like GraphQL operations, can monitor event house operations, can also monitor your mirrored databases and semantic models as well. One thing to bear in mind is that you have to pay extra for this. So you get charged from your capacity consumption for this monitoring event house that gets generated and streamed into. So that's one thing to bear in mind. So let's just talk about access control, because we said that was one of the key responsibilities of the workspace admin. And we can share everything in the workspace with either a user or a Microsoft 365 group or an Entra ID security group. We can do this in your workspace. You'll see Manage Access at the top. And when we share this workspace with a user or a group, we're going to need to give them a role, a workspace role, which is one of either admin, member, contributor, or viewer. Now, this is an important decision because it gives this user a certain set of capabilities that they can perform to every item in the workspace. For the exam, it's really important to understand what these different roles mean and the capabilities that they have when you share the user with a certain role. Now, this is a simplified table. The admin, they can basically do whatever you want. So when you create your workspace, you become an admin of that workspace. And you can also then add other admins, right? All the other roles, they can't do that. The member can add other members, and then write and create data, read data. Everyone can read data. As you kind of go down this tree, you're getting less and less permissions. The contributor, well, they're just there to read and write data and update notebooks and do that kind of thing, edit items, but they can't have any sort of administration. They can't add people, all of that kind of stuff. Viewers are there just to simply normally read data. Sometimes they can read things like notebooks or the output of a data pipeline, for example, but they can't trigger it. They can't make any changes. Now, there's a much more granular breakdown of these workspace roles that I definitely recommend you take a look at for the exam, because you might receive a question like, what role should you give this person because they want to blank, for example, and you need to be pretty familiar with this matrix of permissions, or you need to look it up quickly in the Microsoft Learn documentation if you forget these things. So that's at the workspace level. Now, workspace level is great because you get to share absolutely everything in a workspace, but in many instances, that's not what companies want to do. You might have heard of the principle of least privilege, which states that it's a security principle, really, and it's about giving users and groups access to the data and items that they need to do their job and nothing more, right? So if they only need access to a data warehouse and you don't want to share the whole workspace, you might have 10 different items in that workspace, then item level sharing is how you're going to achieve that. So we don't want to give them workspace level permissions. We're just going to share at the item level. You can do that by right-clicking on any items in your workspace and doing share, and then you get a pop-up that looks a bit like this. Now, there's a few different options, and again, for the exam and just generally working in Fabric, it's very important you understand each of these because they have big implications on what the user can do. So firstly, with no boxes ticked, that's what we call read permission. It essentially just shares the metadata for that item, which means that they can see it in the OneLake data hub, but they can't access anything in the workspace. They don't even know the workspace exists. And they can't access any of the data in the tables, right? Now you might be thinking, what's the point in that? Well, it's very useful if you want to do object level sharing, column level sharing, and we'll look at that in a minute. Now, the first additional permission that we could give is this read all data using SQL, right? So it gives them access to all of the data, and they can access it via the SQL endpoint, right? So they can write T-SQL queries against the data in those tables. The second additional permission is even more permission, right? So they can access that data they can access the underlying OneLake files, essentially, which means that they can use notebooks, the Spark engine, data pipelines, lots of other stuff to read that data. Finally, they can build reports on the default semantic model. So it's really important to understand these permissions. And when we look at the more granular level sharing in a minute, understand that these two are connected. So you need to understand the impact of item level sharing, workspace level sharing, and granular level sharing at the same time. Which brings me down to this more fine-grained control. So you've got a warehouse, and maybe you don't want to share absolutely everything in that warehouse with this person. If you just wanted to share a specific table or view, that's what we call object level security, and you need to know how to do that for the exam. If you want to do specific rows, and here we're talking about the warehouse or the T-SQL endpoint of the Lakehouse specifically. If you want to share specific rows in that warehouse, for example, that would be row level security. Again, you need to know how to define that for the exam. Specific columns would be column level security. And we need to understand about dynamic data masking, which is essentially masking the output or the result set that is shown to a user from a SQL query. We'll look at that as well. So the first things first, let's talk about row level security. And you don't just need to know what row level security is, but you need to understand the syntax, actually getting nitty gritty with the code here. As we're walking through this, imagine a question that they could give you in the exam, right? Maybe they're blank parts of this script and you need to understand, okay, what's missing here? So think about that as we're going through. Note in the top right-hand corner there, the user, as a prerequisite here, does need some access to the table before you can begin this, right? That can either be workspace level viewer. They can also have the table shared at an item level with them with read data permission, right? Or they can have object level security. As long as they have some access to the table to begin with, that's the prerequisite. So how do we define it? Well, normally we create a schema. It is optional, but it just makes your code a bit tidier and your objects in your database a bit tidier. But the core here is creating a function. And it's a table valued function that essentially takes as input or it returns your table, and it's going to return the filtered table based on the user's name, so their login, basically. That's what we're doing in this where statement here. If I can find my mouse. In this where statement here, it's essentially saying, okay, let me filter the table that I'm interested in based on the logged in user's username. Then what we do is we create a security policy, which essentially ties together that function with a specific table, right? So we're saying add this filter predicate function on this particular table with state on, right? So make it active, okay? So these are the 3 steps that you need to implement row level security in the T-SQL endpoint or the lake or the warehouse, sorry. So just make sure you understand the syntax, and if not, what I've done at the top right is a good MS Learn search term to bring up the syntax. If you forget it in the exam, just know that it does exist in the documentation. The next one is around column level and object level security. So again, as a prerequisite, the user or the role that you want to share this these columns or this object, so this table with in your data warehouse, they should not have any workspace role, because then that's just going to override whatever you're going to define at the object level. You're going to use this read read permission, which is no additional permissions here. So your sharing should look like this with no additional permissions. And that's going to be the prerequisite for giving them column level or object level security. So then let's move it over to the right-hand side of the screen. For object level security, it's very simple. We're just going to do a grant select statement on a particular table to a role or a username, like so. Column level, again, is very, very similar. We're going to write another T-SQL statement, grant select on a particular table. This time, we're adding in specific columns that we want to share with that particular user or role, like so, with these open brackets. A few notes on access control. As I tried to make clear, the granular access control can be overridden, right? So if you're spending all your time defining object level security and column level security, but you're not thinking about, or they're actually a viewer in the workspace already, well, it's just going to override absolutely everything that you do at the granular level. So be careful of that. You also need to make sure you're confident in, as I mentioned, how the different levels affect what the user has access to, right? Your role in the workspace, item level, have you shared with read data? Maybe you shared the OneLake data with them. A third point I'd want to make very clear is that access control should be defined for each engine. So currently, this is as of today, and in the semantic model, if you want like row level security in the semantic model as well. But the big caveat here is that OneLake security, which is coming very, very soon, it's currently in private preview, but is very close to becoming public preview, is likely to change how security is defined in Fabric. So depending on when you're watching this, if you're watching this 6 months in the future, we might already be there. But if you're taking the exam, in the next few weeks or months, just bear this in mind. it won't be filtered through into the question sets yet, but just beware that it's going to change basically everything that I've mentioned up to this point. Dynamic data masking. So when a user queries a table using T-SQL, what we can do is add this thing called dynamic data masking. We can apply it to specific columns in a table, and it's going to change what the user sees when they get the data back from their T-SQL query. It's going to look a bit like this, right? We've got the address down here, which has been masked, the email address, salary, all these fields have been masked. Now, I would just point out that it doesn't actually mask the underlying data. It's just this return set here. And it is actually possible to circumvent this or kind of get around it. So just be very careful and make sure you define RLS, or you still maintain RLS, CLS, to maintain control over the data. There's 4 types of mask that you need to understand: default, email, random, and like a custom string called partial. And again, you need to know these pretty well for the exam. You can define a task in 2 ways, either from a existing table using the alter table statement, or create table on new tables, right? And I've given you the syntax here for 4 different masks for both the create statement and the alter table statements here. And again, I'm not going to go through these in detail now just because of time. But the keywords here, they've all got different functions, right? So function default, function email, function random. Random is used for numeric data types. And the custom string is essentially to mask the bit in the middle of a string, right? So credit card numbers, mobile numbers, that kind of thing, for example. And it uses this keyword partial. So you might receive a question about the engineer wants to mask credit card numbers, for example. Which of these masks would be a good choice for that? And what's the syntax that you would need? Another thing that I want to mention here is around OneLake data access. Now, we've talked mostly up until this point about the warehouse and the T-SQL endpoint. Well, in the Lakehouse, we've also got this OneLake data access, currently a preview. And as I mentioned, it's likely to change quite a lot in the future with the incoming OneLake security. But let's just go through it now because it might come up in the exam in the next few weeks or months. Essentially, what it's doing is it's enabling you to share tables or files in your Lakehouse with different roles, right? With different teams, with different groups of people, similarly to how you do in the warehouse, but just with files and folders essentially on the OneLake endpoint in the Lakehouse. So it works very similarly. Maybe you've got some sales tables that you want to share with your sales team, marketing tables with the marketing team, that kind of thing. So just understand how this works. Again, a bit of a warning. Once you press this button in your Lakehouse, you can't go back. So just be careful about that. I don't recommend probably doing this in your production Lakehouse. It's still a preview feature and you can't go back. So just be careful with that one. And with that, I'll hand you back to Ásgeir. I think you're on mute, Ásgeir.
I was, thank you. Yeah, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the governance features that exist in and around Fabric. So if you can do the next slide, please. So there are loads of different governance features that exists, and then here we see like an overview of the things that there are. We are not going to cover all of them. What we are going to cover is the things that we find is most likely that you will be asked about at the exam. So you're going to need to maybe do some of them, or figure out some of them on your own. So next, please. So one of the things that we're going to talk about, there are the 3 things that we're going to focus on here, and plus one other thing is that you're going to focus on classification, preventing leaks, and then now in the data discovery and trust. So for classification, we're going to talk a little bit about sensitivity labels and information protection labels. For data leaks, we're going to talk about data loss prevention and data residency. And then for data discovery and trust, we're going to talk about endorsements. Now, three out of these 5 things don't exist in Fabric, but we can use them in Fabric. And I'm going to point out, when we can, use them in Fabric and how they work. So let's go next one. So the first thing I want to talk about are sensitivity labels. So sensitivity labels are used to classify and protect data. So basically, they are a label that is attached to data, and then they will, have some impact on encryption and what you can do with the data. Basically, it doesn't do a whole lot, but it does to protect the data, and it can follow the data around as well. So if you have it on a semantic model or on a report, it can actually follow that report outside of Power BI if you export it to Excel, for example. At the bottom there, you will see a table. These are the default ones, but be aware that none of these are created within Fabric. They're all created in Purview in Microsoft 365, which is a whole suite of governance tools that you can get. It does come with a license, of course, but if you have the license, you can go on and create those things. So, for example, these 4 default labels: public, internal, confidential, and highly confidential. They are created by default, and they have some impact. So if you have confidential, that's encrypted, and you cannot, maybe you cannot send it outside of the organization. There are some things like that could typically be used for it. You can create in Purview. You can create your own labels. So if you have something else you wanna call it finance, or you wanna call it whatever you want, and then you can put some action on it. And there's there are some limitations, of course, but there's a lot of creativity you can use there. And it does help you, let's say, control access, encryption, and tracking of sensitive data. At all of these next 3 here, there is a link at the bottom there. You can go, and if you want to read a little bit more about applying these in a Fabric context. But I say, if it's created in Purview, you can then apply it in Fabric to most things that are in Fabric. Next, please. If you have sensitivity labels, you can then extend them by using information protection policies. So a label can also have a policy that will do some action depending on what the label is. So here we are more in a more broadened governance rules. So for example, we can say that you cannot export it because it has this label, or you're gonna stop people from doing certain things. You're gonna block them in certain things that are trying to do, depending on the label itself. So not just encrypting and maybe controlling a little bit of access. This is more wider reaching, and it also goes further out than just Fabric. It can also send emails and do all kind of things depending on what you're trying to do. And this is to try to further protect your data depending on what you have, how you have labeled them. These things that are in the table at the bottom there, they are about just like an example of what we can and cannot do with them. So you have sensitivity labels. They are to classify and protect. But information protection label, they will apply some rules that will, so something will happen if you are having this particular label on it. And keep that in mind. Again, the information protection policies, they are created in Purview. You cannot create them in Fabric, but they will apply in Fabric. So you don't apply them in Fabric directly. You put the label on, and then they get applied automatically if they have been created in Purview. It's important to understand that you, as a data engineer, you can put labels on things, but you cannot decide what happens if that label is on. And also with this, as many other things that we have in Fabric, if you are the owner of the item, these don't apply to you. You can always circumvent them. So they don't really apply to you. If you're looking at it in depending on the context of what's better. If you're looking at it in a workspace, you will be able to do whatever you want. Yes, next please. The third thing I want to talk about, which is also a Purview feature, is data loss prevention. If you have been working, for example, with the Power Platform, data loss prevention has been used a lot for many, many years there. But it was not long ago, it started getting used in Power BI, and now, of course, it's in Fabric. So basically, the difference between data loss prevention and the other two we have is that now you have more of an automatic way to classify things. So instead of you saying, here's a label saying this is confidential, it will scan data. So for example, if you have a data set and in it there's a credit card number, it will scan it and it will do some action because it realized there was a credit card number in there. So it will then do something. So for example, it will notify the owner, it will notify the governance team, it will do something. And this is of course to prevent that you have, for example, PII data in your data sets, or to just help you be compliant to GDPR or HIPAA or something else. So for example, if you have a social security number, it will just block everything and then say you need to remove this or mask it before you can actually go on. Use this with care, of course. This is set up in Purview, and then it is applied in Fabric. And you as a data engineer, you will typically not apply it yourself because it's something that someone has set on and told should apply to the Fabric tenant, and then it's going to scan your data automatically. So you're just going to be notified when you're doing something wrong. But luckily, that will help us as data engineers to do things in the right way. So we're not going to be, putting things out there that shouldn't be out there. And of course, we can put all kind of exceptions. You can say this data should not be scanned or this should not be scanned if you have a legitimate reason to have PII data, for example, in your data set. Yes, next please. The fourth thing I want to talk about here is data residency. So basically, where is your data stored? And this can be very important from a governance perspective. And this is a Fabric thing here. So basically, when you buy a capacity, and I briefly talked about it in the first section, but when you buy a capacity, you need to put that into a region. So you say, I want to buy a capacity, I want to put that into Europe West. And when you put that into a region, the data is going to be stored in that region. So it won't leave that region. You might log in through other regions, but the data is going to stay in that particular region. And this is your way to enforce data residency. And if you have requirements where you say, I need to have my US data in the US, I need to have my Europe data in North Europe, and I need to have my UK data in the UK, then you can go and then put many capacities. You need to have one capacity then in each region and have the right workspaces attached to the right capacities. If the workspace is put into a capacity that is in a different region, of course the data is going to be there. Just note that if you put a workspace into a capacity that is in one region, and then you want to move it to another region, you cannot do that. You cannot buy another capacity in a different region and then move that workspace to that other capacity as long as that is not in the same region as the first one. You need to then empty it for Fabric content, and then you can move it, and then you can put the Fabric content back into it. And that's because it's physically being moved, and that's not something Microsoft allows. So be aware of that. Plan this preferably beforehand. And if you cannot plan it beforehand, then note that this limitation, that you need to understand that. And also be aware, of course, that there are might be multiple regions within whatever region you wanted to keep in. So if you want to keep it in Europe, there are multiple, Asia region within Europe. So pick the one that has the cheapest price, the biggest uptime, and is closest to whatever your data is. Some things like that. But for data residency, make sure that you understand how this works. Yeah, please. And the last thing we want to talk about here is endorsements. So when you are trying to promote adoption and trust in your data, endorsement can be a really good tool. There are three ways you can endorse your content. You can make it promoted, certified, or master data. Now, promoted is, in my opinion, rather useless, but it is there still. So basically, everyone who owns a content within Fabric can mark something as promoted. So there's no rules around it. It's just a marking you put. It's a label you put it. And if you make something promoted, it's going to come higher in the list when someone connects to, for example, a semantic model from Power BI. but everyone can do it, and thereby you need to understand that if you want to use promoted in any meaningful way, you need to educate your developers on how to use it, so it does actually carry some meaning. Certified can bear some more meaning, because certified is not something everyone can do. There is a tenant settings within the tenant settings where you can say who can do certification, and this is best enabled only for certain people, so that they can certify things that fulfill some requirement that you have set. For example, many of my customers, they use certified to say that this is data that has been verified and vetted, and we stand by it as a team. You can upload some other content around similar things that's not certified. That means that might be okay, but we cannot guarantee that. But these things here, we guarantee that it is it's verified and vetted. And thereby, you need to make sure that only certain people can do certification, because otherwise it becomes a little bit meaningless. Master data is a rather new one, and it is to help you mark some data as master data. So this is my master product data. This is my master department data, or whatever. And that should also be very few who can do that, so that you don't mark things as master data. You don't have many product lists as your master data. That wouldn't make any sense. And the last thing we want to say is about Purview Hub for administrators. So if you are thinking about governance, if governance is your responsibility, the place you need to go to have a good overview is the Purview Hub for administrators. You can access this in 2 different ways. So it's a part of the admin monitoring workspace. It's one of the reports that are there, but you can also go to the settings in Fabric Tenant. And then there is a link, second last from the bottom, if I remember it correctly, which is the Purview Hub. It is a report that will tell you what is the status of your sensitivity labels, of your endorsements, and of domains and different things. You can go and you can take a look, and you can monitor how things are being used. So if you're responsible for the governance, this is where you go and see if your data engineers are actually doing the sensitivity labels and endorsements in a correct way. So there's a direct link there in the bottom where you can go and you can find that one. And that, I think, concludes the content we have for today. Now we have some few things we want to share with you before we go.
Awesome. Yeah, just a few very important announcements and final thoughts just to wrap up the session today. Thank you very much, Ásgeir. So I just want to go through a few practical tips. So for the DP-700 exam, it's a challenging exam. You need to get hands-on. These sessions are great for sharing knowledge, going through these live recordings, but really you also need to do hands-on practice, building solutions in Fabric. And if you're not doing that in your organization, make sure, try and get a hold of a free trial and just build solutions in Microsoft Fabric, data engineering solutions. That's really going to help you, that knowledge stick a lot better. We've also got the study guide. Use that as your primary resource to kind of check all of the different elements that you should be revising. There's also now the practice assessment for DP-700. So make sure you go through that multiple times. See, hopefully you can get 80, 90% before the exam. Some of the questions are a little bit easier than you might expect in the exam. So make sure you're getting a high score on that. There's also Microsoft Learn, an amazing resource. We've covered a lot of ground today. And we've tried to highlight really important Learn documentation pages for each section. So if you get a little bit stuck in the exam, you can use Learn, but just be careful with that in the exam because it can suck up a lot of time. So maybe wait until the end once you've gone through all the questions once would be my advice.
Can I
sample projects again?
Can I jump in here? Well, just be aware that when you're in your exam that you might not be able to come back to a section. So read the instruction carefully. So if you have left something for later, make sure you do it before you leave the section. Sorry.
Great point. Yeah. I'm sure also the next
next week's
session there'll be lots more exam day tips like this about how to actually prepare for the exam, how to navigate the exam, because in my opinion, time management within the exam is a really important factor. Actually, lots of people kind of get a little bit stuck up or a little bit caught up in the exam and they don't make it all the way through. And if you're doing that, it's going to be difficult to pass the exam if you're not going through the whole question paper. So definitely tune in May the 21st. It's going to be practical exam tips and an open Q&A. So if we haven't managed to answer all of your questions in the chat, I'm sure we have got amazing moderators today. But if you've got any more questions, either you can wait until the 21st, or you can go straight to Reddit now and drop your questions in this Ask Me Anything thread here on Reddit/r/Microsoft Fabric. We've got Alexi, Shabnam, Matthias, and Anu answering questions there about certification, DP-700, DP-600, absolutely anything to do with Microsoft Fabric exams. So definitely go there. I think the questions are open now, and that starts at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 4 p.m. UTC. So it's literally in the next few hours that you can go and have a look at that. Just a final call for the sweepstake. If you take part in the AI Skills Challenge, then you can submit to be entered into a draw. So they're giving away 50,000. I think they've probably given away some of those already, but there's still thousands of free exam vouchers that they're giving away. So there's nothing better than a free exam. So make sure you do that. You've got until the 28th, but it's recommended that you do it before then, because then you get multiple chances in that sweepstake. So just go to the code there, or aka.ms/gc/DP700. Finally, there's a link to a lot more resources there to help you prepare for the DP-700 exam. And with that, I'll say thank you very much, Ásgeir, and thank you very much to our moderators today in the chat working hard. How are you doing, Ásgeir? Do you enjoy that?
Yes, thank you, Will. I think it was actually pretty good. We finished on time, which I'm proud of, and hopefully everyone has gotten the answer. But if you felt we went fast through it, which we did, you can always go back and watch it later on. You can pause it. The links we have on the slides. You can always pause the video and then go and type out the link. Because those learn links are really, really important, and the more you're familiar with them, the easier it's going to be if you need to search for anything during the exam.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's difficult to condense a lot of content into just a 1 hour session. So yeah, definitely go back through the recordings, have a look at the Learn documentation, do your own notes, your own studying at your own pace. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining. See you on May the 21st for the next session and the final session in this series, and head over straight to the Reddit now to answer your questions of those experts. Thanks very much. Hope you enjoyed the session. See you again soon.
Bye-bye.